We're back, people. Welcome back to the show. Hope you're all well. Hope you're enjoying the World Cup that's currently on and looking forward to Brazil later. We're here to talk Arsenal today, and we'll probably mention a little bit of the World Cup, seeing as it's in and around in the background. But I thought none other than Tom Canton to be best to join me today. Tom, how you doing, bro?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. You?
I'm very well, man. I'm good, and I always enjoy talking Arsenal with you, mate. It feels weird that club football is not back still, but do you know what? It won't be long, will it? It's only a few weeks, and we'll be talking about Arsenal's West Ham and Brighton fixtures that will be upcoming, and then a window that, let's be honest, everyone's looking forward to already. So, I'm looking forward to this World Cup sort of coming to its close, and then we can look forward to Arsenal again, mate. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm enjoying some of the games, and I think the third round of the group stage is often one of the best kind of parts of the World Cup because of all the chaos and the permutations of who goes through and who doesn't. So, yeah, I've enjoyed it. But I am very much willing Arsenal to return soon. Not only that, because obviously when it's your day job, trying to write and talk about Arsenal every day. It's when there's a World Cup on in the middle of the season, it's a bit of a content drought at times. So yeah, very much hoping for them to return.
Well, let's talk quickly about the World Cup because I know that there's been a few games that have caused some drama in terms of VAR. There's been decisions and penalties. There's been balls. Did it go out? Did it not? But actually, overall, it's been quite an exciting World Cup, Tom. Like, what I just wanted to ask what you've made of it. Has there been any shocks or surprises for you? And of course, who you going for at the moment? It's like getting towards the group stages being finished now. Like, who do you
Mm.
fancy?
Yeah, obviously we're recording this before Brazil play their last game, but I mean they look the obvious kind of candidates at the moment for favourites. Interestingly, I think France come next, and then probably England. I think that England have. When you look at the chaos of the tournament, really, I mean, Argentina didn't start well at all. Germany are out. Spain looked good against Costa Rica, but have then struggled in their last two games, drawing and then losing. Italy, of course, aren't in the competition. So you're looking at the teams that could go through and you're thinking who is going to be able to beat England. You think it probably would be France of any team. I think they could meet them in the quarterfinals, if I'm right. So if England beat France, I feel as though Brazil are the only team that will really cause them, the other kind of issues because Argentina, as I say, look a bit dodgy. Saying that, obviously, we'll lose to Senegal on Sunday. That's now obviously going to happen because I've said that, we're third favourites at the point in time. But yeah, it's been enjoyable. I think some of the games, some of the surprises. I think Senegal actually going through in their group in the end was a great kind of turnaround for them. Whilst we're recording, Uruguay look like they might turn around their group as well. Japan, massive success story, I think, as well. And Australia going through as well is another big one. Denmark, hugely disappointing, considering they got to the semis of the Euros, last time out. I mean, that said, Italy got to the final of that tournament, so and not even in this one. So who cares about previous form? It's kind of where you are at now. So yeah, there's been some really interesting kind of moves through, but I am hopeful as an England fan that maybe we can go further than I and others gave them credit for at the start of the tournament.
I think with England, it's all on what Gareth Southgate does with the attacking options that he has, because I don't think England have ever had this many attacking options. I remember in the golden generation, England had Beckham and Gerrard and Lampard and Scholes and Rooney and Owen, and we thought, wow. But actually, when you look at what we've got now, Rice and Bellingham is great because of how young they are and how good they are. But when you look forward, you've got the Fodens, the Grealishes, the Sakas, Sterlings, Madisons, Mounts, obviously Harry Kane and Callum Wilson. And I can't lie, Tom. There's some being left at home that would sit there and think, "Wow, I'm any other era, I would be getting in." Tammy Abraham, Ivan Toney, etc. So I don't think Gareth Southgate's not got the squad. I think sometimes he's let himself down by being a little bit negative with his tactics. And I hope that although Wales, Iran, and USA are no huge tests, that when we do see a huge test, we go in actually give it a go. Because I haven't seen England give it a go yet. I've not seen against Iran a 6-2, people will go, they give it a go there. I actually don't think we really went full pelt to try and put it on Iran. I just think we were better than them, and we just went from there. The doors opened up for us thanks to a kind of early goals, and it just went from there. USA, completely different. They set up very negatively and very compact, and I thought we found it hard to break them down. And I think when it comes to Wales, it's just a shocking first half of football, if I'm honest, from both parts. And then in the second half, we managed to get through. So I haven't seen from England yet a wow performance. But what I will say is that I haven't really seen any team that's wowed me yet. And perhaps I'm being harsh here, Tom. Maybe I am being harsh here. I still see the same players from the last two World Cups playing. Where are all these young players? I mean, I see Pedri and Gavi. I see Mbappe. I see Musiala, is it, from Germany? But apart from that, bro, I'm not really looking at too many wow players coming through. I'm still looking at all the 30 and 40-year-olds, it seems.
Yeah, it is interesting actually when you consider it that way. I think there's a lot of the African teams actually have got a lot of young players in this tournament in particular, and Africa's been really well represented this tournament. We've already seen Senegal, and there's one other that's gone through that skipped my mind. Who is the other African team? Morocco that's gone through, and then of course Ghana could still, depending on today's result, but we don't know at this point. They're losing at the moment, and then you got Cameroon later on this evening as well that don't look like they'll go through. But yeah, there's a lot of young players in that sense, but not, besides Mohamed Kudus, I think of Ghana, I'm not really looking elsewhere of any stars necessarily that I think are going to earn a move or anything like that. So yeah, it is interesting that there's not necessarily the young stars coming through. England have a lot; they're just not really using them to the best of. I think Tomori could have been called up. Wasn't. I think Foden should be starting each and every game, but isn't. Bukayo Saka, of course, should be starting every game as well, in my view, but hasn't been either. Although you probably say that's because of rest more than him not earning a start. But I think that Gareth Southgate's leaned a bit more on experience. Maybe because we're in the middle of a kind of a weird mid-season tournament, they're leaning more on youth, more on experience than youth to kind of get them through that. It's only a theory, but maybe it is the reason why they've gone for more that than the other. But yeah, Spain, I think, are kind of more so on their own in representing the youth along with France. Those two in particular seem to be the key ones with the young teams. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the flip of a coin for me between Brazil and Argentina before a ball was kicked. Argentina shocked everybody in the first game by losing to Saudi Arabia, but have now pulled it back. Brazil, as you've mentioned already, look like they've got a very strong squad. I think it's fair to say that England are in the race for that because I think that the players that we've got that we can either start or bring on are certainly exciting. I think France look very well balanced, and obviously they're the holding champions, so it'd be foolish not to think that they've got a chance. Spain, I think, probably play some of the best football, but I just worry that they haven't got that kind of killer instinct at times. It seems like they either blitz teams or they struggle. There's no in between with Spain. So I wonder what's going to happen there. But I just feel in the back of my mind, Tom, that if there's going to be a shock team to win it, it will be this tournament because there's nobody wowing me yet. Maybe a Morocco, like you mentioned, or maybe, Japan or some crazy, crazy team that could win this World Cup because it seems to me like nobody at the moment is clear favourites. And that, of course, makes it exciting, mate, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's probably been the most unpredictable World Cup I can remember in my lifetime, where you've got like 6 or 7 teams at the start of the tournament who could have arguably won it. I think some of those teams have even already been knocked out. Germany being, of course, one of those. I know maybe not many people were peddling them to win the competition, but they certainly are always up there as one of the most notable nations in the competition. I haven't mentioned Portugal either, who have had a decent start to their group stage. Ronaldo's chaos hasn't seemed to have affected them too much, and they're getting goals from elsewhere. Joao Felix getting goals, Bruno Fernandes getting goals, so there is obviously, I think, outsiders that could have a potential chance as well. I've really enjoyed watching Japan and seeing what they've done because you never know what they're going to do. They can lose to Costa Rica and then beat Germany and Spain. So who knows what's going to happen with them in the rest of the tournament. If Tomiyasu was fit, I don't think he is fully fit, obviously, because he's not been starting these games. But if they do get him fit for those knockout rounds, he's such an asset defensively for them to kind of lock down that part of the team that is letting them down a bit, because offensively they look kind of dangerous when they bring on some of their substitute players like Mitoma from Brighton, who I'm a big fan of, and Takuma Asano as well. I never thought I'd be talking about a World Cup, but yeah, he's obviously got himself on the score sheet against Spain. Was it Spain? I think it was, wasn't it? The great touchdown and then finish. It was, yeah. So
Germany or Spain? Germany.
Was it Germany? It was Germany, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was Germany in the first game, and then the second game. Who was it who scored in the? Because it was kind of that crazy if it went off or not. And
it
then
was
came
crazy.
back on
I
the
don't know
field.
who scored, but it was mad. But Tomiyasu come on, which means that he is actually more he's actually fitter than I thought. But Tom, I wanted to touch on a couple of things before we move to Arsenal. Where do you stand on the Arsenal players that are at the World Cup? Do you want them all to come home quickly, or do you want them to actually experience success?
It's tough. I think that if Ghana go out today, I'm going to be pretty pleased. I think because Thomas Partey in particular is a player that has his injury problems, and so playing 3 games very close to one another and starting all 3 of them as well, there's worries that was going to cause him a problem. So if we can make it through this World Cup and Thomas Partey is the one that stays fit, I think that's really important for us going into the games after the World Cup. But I don't mind the rest of them carrying on. I think that Jesus and Martinelli aren't going to play too many minutes anyway. But if they can get a goal, or especially Jesus, if he can get a goal in you imagine today's game he might start, then that's going to be great for his confidence. Winning the World Cup in Brazil is one of the biggest kind of, confidence boosts you can get as a player if you are Brazilian, because it means just so much more to you than any other nation, really, the World Cup. So I think there's real benefits from them going further in the tournament and getting success in the tournament. But there is always with some players, as I say, like Partey, where I'm more cautious about them playing more minutes, and I actually probably would rather them come home. We've obviously already seen Ben White return because of personal reasons. Ramsdale's not really playing. Tommy Asu's had his fitness problems as well. Xhaka's played every game, but could go home today if Switzerland have a bad result and other results don't go against them as well. Xhaka's never really had too many fitness issues. He had that bad injury with his knee last season, but other than that, he's kind of usually reliable to play as many games as you want him to. So I don't necessarily think that the World Cup, besides Partey, is a big problem for our team.
Fair play, man. Listen, you're a guy who has a lot of scouting, loves his transfers. I want to talk to you about anyone in this World Cup you think Arsenal should be taking a keen eye on towards January, or of course the summer transfer windows. Anyone in this tournament that you've been impressed with, mate, that is a realistic target potentially for Arsenal?
I've mentioned him already, and I really like Mitoma at Japan. And we're looking at kind of wide players that could add some depth and quality. Still young, early 20s still. And he's come onto the scene at Brighton and done really well. And if there's one team that's well represented at the World Cup, it's Brighton. They've had the Ecuadorian guys with Caicedo and Estupiñán have been playing as well. I think, is it Sacramento as well? They've got who's been playing there as well, and of course McAllister scored for Argentina as well. So Brighton have got some really good representation at the tournament. Wayne Hennessy actually in the chat says about Kudus, the Ghanaian youngster as well, another attacking option. He might be someone that Arsenal could be keeping an eye on. I've seen a couple of stories saying that Arsenal are looking at him, but he's more of an attacking midfielder. I know he can play in a wide area, but I think he's more of kind of a play behind the striker type forward. So whether or not we need that with Ødegaard, Smith Rowe and Fabio Vieira here is another question. But Spain-wise, Ferran Torres, as a player that can play in all front three positions, scored a couple of goals in the opening game for Spain. He's a player I like, has obviously worked with Arteta at Man City as well. So maybe he's one to continue watching as we go into the knockout stages. So, and I think realistically, he's kind of one of those players that might. And also Anguissa, who plays for Napoli, of course, in the midfield. Didn't really shine at Fulham necessarily, but since moving to Serie A has done fantastically well. I think it'd be very expensive, but if you're looking for kind of a long-term Partey replacement, I think Anguissa is a great example of someone who could be that for us in the future. But again, being at Napoli is going to cost you a lot of money to get hold of.
Interesting. I don't think I've seen anybody in this World Cup that I think could come in January. I think all of the moves that I'd look would be probably a summer move. I'm a big fan of what I see of Milinkovic Savic, obviously, over the last couple of years. That's always going to be a summer move, if a move at all, to the Arsenal. But one player you haven't mentioned, which I thought you might mention, who I think has been really good this tournament, scoring 3 and 3, is Cody Gakpo. And it's a player that you and I have spoken about. It's somebody at PSV that we played against, to be fair, and looked pretty quiet at the Emirates, but not so quiet in the away leg. But I do like this player. There's a lot about him I do like. He can play across the front 3 positions from what I'm being told. I hear Ten Hag and Manchester United are interested, and perhaps he will end up there. Who knows? But do you think that's a player that Arsenal would be tempted to show an interest in, Tom?
Well, they have got an interest in him, and they've followed him for a long time. But there's something clearly holding them back, because he signed a new contract in January of this year. He signed a contract back in the last January window. And Arsenal were interested then and were watching him. And, the thing about Arsenal I'm a little bit critical of in the window is sometimes we wait that little bit extra too long with some players, because we want to be cautious, because if we sign a player for a significant kind of investment, we want to make sure that they're going to be hits and not misses. And that means you need to be a bit more sure, of course, when you go and sign. We're not like City or Chelsea, or United, that can just blow a load of money on a player. And if it doesn't work out, like, an Eloquent Mangala at City, or someone at Chelsea. I'm trying to think of a recent investment at Chelsea that's not necessarily worked out. I mean, you think about, arguably Havertz has not been a £70 million player really for them.
Havertz,
yeah. So I think that with us, we wait a bit longer, and we need to be sure, like Jesus, mid-20s now, Zinchenko mid-20s, and we've signed them at that age. Ramsdale, we waited for a couple of seasons in the Premier League. White, we waited for a season in the Premier League. before we signed him. And that obviously ups the price of both of those players to 30 plus in the case of Ramsdale and 50 plus in the case of White. So I'd like us to be a bit quicker. And if we'd have gone for Gakpo, say, last January before he signed that deal, you probably could have got him for less than 30 million. But now he's going to cost you upwards of 40, maybe even 50. And I think that might be too much for Arsenal for a player who they're not 100% convinced by, because I think they are looking at other players like Mykhailo Mudryk, for instance, who they kind of look at as maybe a smarter investment than Gakpo. And I'm not sure why that's the case necessarily, because his goal scoring record and goal contributing record is brilliant, for PSV. And that's continued into this tournament. But having watched the Netherlands, what I would say is that his goals are kind of individual moments. The whole performance of the 90 minutes, if you watch him, it's not kind of, you wouldn't say like, he scored 3 goals in 3 games. He must be having an amazing tournament from a goal scoring standpoint. Yeah, he is. But I think if you watch the 90-minute performances of Gakpo in each game, if those individual moments don't happen, you'd say obviously it sounds like a really Michael Owen-esque thing to say, if he doesn't score those 3 goals, he's in a terrible tournament. But I'm trying to get the point across that outside of just that goal, the performance doesn't inspire you to think, wow, this guy's like got that explosive turn of pace, or, he's taken on players left, right, and centre. Like Mudryk, when you watch him, and I remember watching the game when he came on for Ukraine against Scotland, like he has continuous and consistent moments where he kind of explodes out and is really impressive, and you think under the right coaching and in the right team could be taken that to that next level. Whereas Gakpo, kind of like Havertz, playing at Bayer Leverkusen, scoring plenty of goals, I think there's question marks about whether or not coming to the Premier League, if he'd be able to transition what he's doing in the Eredivisie, or as Havertz was doing the Bundesliga, to the Premier League. And I think that's kind of the question that we have to ask, and maybe the question that Arsenal are asking themselves about Gakpo. Because when I speak to people who watch a lot more Eredivisie football than I do, they're kind of saying that, yeah, he's done well to stay at PSV because that's really helped him raise his profile. He's developed more, he's scored more goals, but they're never sure whether or not he will make it in the Premier League or I mean, he's been linked with Real Madrid, for instance, whether he'd make it somewhere like that. So maybe this is kind of where his game is at PSV. But who knows? He might come to Man United and absolutely smash it and prove people wrong. We'll have to wait and see. But I don't think Arsenal will sign him.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Players from Holland, you can think of a few that have done really well. Van Persie, Van Nistelrooy, Dennis Bergkamp, Luis Suarez. But there are some that have been shocking. I look at Vincent Janssen and Mattia Kezman and Bergwijn. Exactly. So there's been some shockers as well. So it would be a risk. But listen, Tom, it's a risk every signing, isn't it? You never know how they're going to quite settle. I like what I see from Cody Gakpo, but I definitely take what you're saying. I do think that it would be, of course, a risk. But I think with Cody Gakpo, when I look at what he could bring to Arsenal, I personally would feel it would be more than somebody like Eddie Nketiah. So I think it would be a good signing still. So we'll see what happens. The reason I wanted to talk about this today was Juventus look like they're in trouble again, Tom, when it comes to financial fair play. I don't quite know how they're the only club, because Barcelona, I don't know how they've got away with it. Real Madrid, PSG, we can talk about Man City of the other year when it went wrong for them. What do you make of this before we go into what could happen next? Like, do you think this... what do you think will happen with Juventus? Is this like extreme? Is this nothing's going to happen? They'll end up paying a fine? Or are they in serious trouble like we're being told, mate?
It could be. I mean, Italian football in general has a history, of issues, as we know, not just with Juventus, but Juventus are obviously the big example. Remember when they were relegated because of the chaos that happened, the match fixing and all that stuff.
2006 or whatever, yeah.
Indeed. I remember Antonio Conte was embroiled in something. I think he was cleared of his in the end.
Yeah.
But there's kind of always, so you go back to Italian football, there's a lot of kind of examples of this. It is already costing them, because, I mean, you say costing them because they've lost their board. Their board's resigned. Nedved's gone, Agnelli's gone. Yeah. There's an investigation going on, I think, for the transfers that took place between 2019 and 2021, which Paratici, the director at Spurs, was at Juventus at that time. He's being investigated for that. I obviously don't know whether or not there will be any kind of punishment for it. But even so, if you're a player at Juventus, you're looking at kind of your situation as a player there, and you're thinking, am I in a competitive side? Am I in a team that's going to be able to compete consistently at the top level going forwards? And Juventus have kind of fell away in the last couple of years. We've seen Milan win the league last season. We saw Inter Milan win the season before that. And Juve have kind of been trying to claw their way into the top four during both of those seasons. They've stayed in the Champions League, but just. And this season they sit third, but I think they're something like 10 points off the lead at the moment still. And I think they're only a few points off falling out of the top four. It's really quite competitive in Serie A again this season. It's been one of the most competitive leagues, to be fair, the last few years. So I think that there will be players at Juve looking at their situation going, maybe I should jump, now. And it might be the best time to jump and kind of get out while I can. And maybe even on the cheap, because if Juventus are, making this serious loss, as they have done, it's been published, they'll be wanting to make money back, surely, to try and balance the books. And maybe some of the players that signed during that period of 2019 to 2021 might be the ones. Locatelli, of course, is one of those, heavily linked to Arsenal at the time. He might be one of the players that they move on. I think Napoli have also been looked into as well. I think Osimhen's transfer was under investigation. Wow. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Whether it's Calciopoli, as Hambo says in the chat box, version 2, I don't know. But it's going to be interesting seeing the fallout of this one.
It will, man. It's not been a good year for Italy. They can't qualify for a World Cup, and now all of their teams are getting investigated and people. In all honesty, Tom, do you think there'll be a few players now, or teams, should I say, going for some of these players? We mentioned Chiesa, Vlahovic, Locatelli, you mentioned. There's some others as well. Do you think that's going to happen now? And they're going to test the waters, so to speak, these other teams?
Maybe. It wouldn't surprise me. I wrote about it the other day, actually, saying kind of which players should we be looking at if there is this situation. And Locatelli was kind of the main one. Vlahovic, I think, is a really interesting profile because he wasn't involved in the period that's been investigated because it was in January of this year. But it was a really, like Locatelli, it was a bit of a strange transfer because Fiorentina at the time were absolutely adamant that he wasn't going anywhere. And then all of a sudden, after loads of talk about Arsenal, Juventus came straight in and said, here's some money. And they were like, yeah, sure, you can go, even though we've been saying for weeks and months that he's not going to be sold and he'll be staying at least to the end of the season. So, and then the Locatelli one's really odd because he signed, I think Arsenal were confirmed to have put a bid in of around 40 million euros. And then he left Sassuolo for a 2-year loan deal, of which this summer Sassuolo are owed something close to 33 million quid, something around that. And that's less than what obviously Arsenal offered that got rejected. So it's really difficult to kind of understand why or how and what makes sense around these deals. But yeah, whether or not that means teams will start going in for Locatelli and Vlahovic, and Moise Kean had a good month. I think he won the Player of the Month actually in Serie A. So he's been quite good since going back to there from Everton. He was on loan, I think, at PSG, wasn't he, from Everton for a season as well, and he's done okay. So maybe he'll be someone that someone looks to. Chiesa's the big one, though. I think he's obviously the young, I say young, early to mid-20s now that people will be looking at the top level. Italian players don't tend to leave Italy. It's very rare you see Italian players make that move. We've only seen a few take that step to England. You think of Jorginho, of course. But most of the time, the Italian players tend to stay in Serie A, similar to, German players. A lot of German players like to develop and then move to Dortmund or Bayern and go there. It's a similar thing there. Only it's really kind of France and Portugal that you see kind of moving elsewhere. Spanish players have started to move a lot more abroad as well recently. So we'll see if that starts to change in Italy and Germany. But it's going to be interesting what players do end up leaving, if any.
Yeah, you're right. It's mad because Zola, Di Canio, I remember Graziano Pella coming and doing well before he went over to China. But other than that,
I think as well.
Di Matteo, other than that, I don't really look back and think, can reel out a load of Italian names. Vialli's obviously another one. But I don't look at it.
Emiliano Viviano, do you remember him?
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
wow, I do. Wow. But I do think you're right. A lot of them stay over that way. But the thing that makes me laugh about this one is that they've all gone. So it looks like something big is going to happen at Juve. So I would be surprised if nobody goes in for some of their players now. And of course, you've mentioned Locatelli, you've mentioned Chiesa, you've mentioned Vlahovic. They're the ones I think everybody would be looking at first of all. Locatelli's a really interesting player and was one that I really wanted when we put in a bid for him. But the one that I was dying for was Vlahovic. And I remember, Tom, in January when we were speaking about it, and Juve was saying, we won't be getting him because we've got no money. Now all of a sudden they're getting done because of financial fair play, which would suggest that probably they didn't have any money when they signed Vlahovic, but they still got him. if there was an option for us to get him, would that excite you, Vlahovic? Because for me, I think profile-wise, he's everything that Arsenal have been lacking over a long period of time, probably since the likes of Olivier Giroud in terms of the aerial threat. But he definitely knows where the goal is, mate.
Yeah. We talk a lot about this on TGT about like the idea of signing this Plan B style striker, this striker that's got more physicality and is going to give you more in the air and stuff. And I look at kind of the Ronaldo situation at United and now the Haaland situation at Man City. And one of the listeners on the channel came up with this theory called bottlenecking, where the team kind of is all centered around the ball going into this one target man that's scoring most of the goals. And I think we've seen that this year at Man City and potentially why they are adjusting and dropping points and why Arsenal have been able to open this gap between themselves and City because, when Haaland's not there, they've struggled to kind of get the points. They've been very fortunate in some of the games that Haaland's not been there or when he's had to come off the bench and get a couple of goals because they're adjusting to playing with this kind of classic number 9. Whereas before, anyone could score in that team, whether it was De Bruyne or Foden or Silva or Mahrez, or Jesus, of course, when he was there as well. They had so many attacking options, Grealish, of course, coming in as well to try and score Bernardo Silva and of course, elsewhere in the team that they've got goals coming from Joao Cancelo as well. At the back, Ruben Diaz was scoring. So now it's a lot more focused on Haaland. And I think that if Vlahovic was to say move to Arsenal, there's an argument that we might suffer that same kind of fate, whereas we start trying to focus our efforts more around an individual striker. If you look at his assists, I think he has 2 assists this season. Whereas you look at Jesus, I think he's on 7, in the Premier League, and he's got 5 goals on top of that as well. And I think Arsenal with Jesus have got kind of this perfect fit, kind of the glove that fits perfectly in a sense in this team. Whereas before with Lacazette, yes, he dropped deep. Yes, he got assists, but he didn't score enough goals for us. Jesus is on this goal-scoring drought, as we know, but his performances have been integral to every single game he's played in pretty much this season. And so that collaborativeness from him, if that's even a word, has really kind of enabled us to find our footing at the top of the table and really kind of emphasize the qualities of others like Saka and Martinelli and Odegaard being our top scorer now as well in the league. So I think it's important that you find balance in a striker. And I'm not sure that Vlahovic offers balance to the team in the same way that Jesus does.
I agree with what you're saying there. Lastly, I don't think anybody offers the balance Jesus does. I've been so impressed with him. It's his all-round game. That is, I'm a bit frustrated about the lack of goals, like you said. I am because I want my number 9 scoring goals. But when you're not scoring and you're doing everything else right and assisting others, then you get away with it. Do you know what I mean? And he will score goals. He's not going to not score ever again. He's in and around the box. He's a nuisance. He's a menace, and he's missed a couple of chances. So it means he's getting in those positions still. As for Vlahovic coming to Arsenal, I don't see it happening, if I'm honest. Now, I think we've kind of missed that. And I'm not so sure that Mikel Arteta wants him. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't know that that's something that he'd be interested in going back in for. But where I disagree with what some of your listeners have said on Gooner Talk is it might not be. I think they're right, by the way. Let me say that first of all. I think they're right. I think Nunez, Haaland, Harry Kane, it's all about getting it to them. I get that. I think, though, sometimes a different dimension is what you need. And if it isn't working with Jesus or Jesus is not scoring or we want to try Jesus wide and bring on a Vlahovic for 60 minutes or half an hour, that would be a fantastic option. Whether Vlahovic wants to sit on the bench at Arsenal is obviously a different question. But when it comes to what we need, I think we do need a different option up front, a little bit of an aerial threat. And Jesus actually wins a lot of headers for a 5'9" centre forward. But I do think that it's always good to have someone in there that's large. And I'm a big fan of Tammy Abraham, and everyone disagrees and laughs and says he's no good. But I actually quite like him. I think he's criminally underrated in parts. So that's the type that I'd like to see Arsenal go for in the summer. I don't see any of these as January moves. I don't think we're going to get a centre forward in January. I really don't. I think that if we're going to get anybody, then it definitely won't be a centre forward. But I thought it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on the Juve stuff. So I appreciate that. I feel personally like this could all just be nothing, and in a couple of weeks' time, it will be like Juventus are getting fined, and that'll be it. Because that's what happened with Man City.
And the fines are pitiful as well, aren't they?
Yeah, it's like £5 million or something.
It's like, if you're lucky.
Do you want me to? Do you want that in cash? It's mad. So we'll see what happens there. But I thought it was worth bringing up. Lastly, Tom, I want to come on to the deals that we'd spoken about previously. Do you know any knowledge if we're any closer to Mudryk, Danilo, or Tielemans, mate?
In short, no, because Arsenal, in a sense, always want to try and keep their business as secretive as possible. And you've seen over the course of this World Cup, kind of the stories that have come out have been, I'd say, pretty vague regarding Arsenal as well. They are keeping everything very quiet. I mean, so much so that they're keeping like the rumoured friendly that we were supposed to play against Watford as secret as possible. I text someone at the club the other day asking about the friendly against Watford that's been reported, and they were like, if it happens and hadn't been yet agreed fully, we're keeping it completely hush behind the scenes until the match report comes out afterwards. So they are keeping as going to that level of secrecy around everything. So transfers, it's very difficult. The only way in which you kind of get information through, and how a lot of me and other colleagues get information through often is through contacts through agents or people at other clubs, and usually information only comes out if that player's agent or representative or the club in some cases wants there to be knowledge out there in the open to help with a negotiating tactic. That's usually what happens. It's the way that I've certainly learned the game. I think that with the players like Mudryk, he's doing all the things he needs to do as a player, doing these interviews, talking outwardly about wanting to move in January, being frustrated at the the price tag that's associated with him. But yeah, that interview he did with Zinchenko's other half, that's exceptionally telling and very rare that you see that happen for a player that's still at the club that he's wanted to move on from. We've just seen Ronaldo basically sacked for doing an interview about kind of his club. So seeing Mudryk come out and doing an interview so openly about wanting to move on and where his ambitions are, that's about as much as you can do to kind of blur the line, if you like, between what's acceptable whilst you're an employee at a football club and what isn't acceptable. So he's doing all the right things. Arsenal are interested. They won't pay the figure that Shakhtar are wanting. That there's not going to go anywhere near 80+ million quid for this guy. And then the others are Danilo, who Arsenal have had a long-term interest in. We wanted him last summer, but they couldn't get hold of him because Palmeiras weren't willing to sell at that point, other than for his release clause, which is like 80-odd million quid. And Tielemans is an interesting one. I basically heard that Edu was very much willing to wait on Tielemans till his contract run out. They never needed to worry about paying what Leicester are asking, because it was frankly ridiculous for a player with a year left on their contract. And even with 6 months left in January, Leicester are still going to be asking for a significant fee for him, because they want to try and maximise the value. And I think they'd get more value out of probably keeping him than accepting something close to 15 million quid. So that's, I think the Tielemans thing will very much depend upon his form for the rest of this season. If he kind of picks up and does all right between now and the end, Arsenal still may be tempted. But if he drops and continues to kind of drop in form as we have seen, especially at the start of this season, Arsenal may consider other options. And we're already seeing some links with Ismail Benassa now at Milan. I've not heard anything about that personally, but that has been, spoken
It's the
about.
guy we had.
Yeah, he came through. Well, he didn't come through at Hale, and we signed him as a young player, and did play youth football with us, but left for Empoli. And then when he actually left Empoli to go to Milan, we had an option to kind of get a first refusal on him, and we didn't do anything with that. We got, I think, a sell-on clause we benefited from. Didn't get much money from it, but we got a sell-on clause in him when he moved to Milan, and he's gone to become a really, really good midfielder. So it'll be interesting. He does kind of fit the profile we're after, a player that can play deep, in the midfield, can operate in competition with Partey, could play with Partey. He's a very good player. Apparently, I think I saw something today about him preferring to stay at Milan. It's just about whether or not they'll pay what he wants to be paid. And it's a reasonable Premier League wage, but Serie A wages are significantly lower. So we'll have to wait and see with that one.
Yeah, we will. Tom, if I was to ask you to put money on it, like those three players at Arsenal come January, like what you're thinking out of those three? Do you think there's potential to get all three? Do you think one? Do you think two maybe? What's your head saying, mate?
I mean, player by player, Mudryk, I think, is 50-50. It very much depends on whether or not Arsenal are willing to go to a price that Shakhtar are willing to accept. That seems obvious, but that is the case. Danilo, I think there's a good chance that deal could happen. Arsenal have had a long-term interest in this guy, and as I say, wanted him in the summer, but he wasn't gettable. Is gettable now, so I think there's a good chance that deal could happen. But in terms of how many? I think Arsenal should be looking to sign two. I think Arsenal want to sign at least two in this window, and I think they recognise the the opportunity that's at stake for this season. And I think they recognise if they don't strengthen in this window, then they are going to, like last season, shoot themselves in the foot a bit. And they've already felt that with what happened last season. So I think it would be really naive for them not to try and bring in some quality in this window. But there is always kind of this underlying argument at Arsenal of if they can't find the player that they think is good enough, they aren't just going to go and sign anyone. It's completely subjective who anyone is, but it's going to be down to them. And if they feel as though they can't find that player, then they won't do it, which could end up frustrating us because we might see some players move in January that we think we could have signed. But I remember back to last January, and I was saying maybe we should go after Arthur Cabral, maybe we should go and get Wout Weghorst on a 6-month loan. And I look back in the summer and I think, I'm glad that we didn't do that in the end, because Cabral's come to nothing, in the end. And we've seen players move in that January window that didn't really make too much of a difference to the teams. So even though I think we missed a beat in that January window, maybe with someone else, I see the credit in that argument of signing someone that has to be good enough, because sometimes it doesn't always work out. But it just feels to me if we don't sign somebody, it's a huge opportunity missed this season.
Massively, mate. I think the title challenge is there if we get a couple of players in. I want to ask you this lastly before we wrap up, mate. What would be satisfying for you as an Arsenal fan in terms of positions that we cover in January? What would you be not happy with, because you obviously want everybody to come into Arsenal, but what do you think would be a really good window for Arsenal?
A really good window, I think, is 3 players. I think that's a really, really good window. I think a successful window is adding a midfielder to bring competition to Thomas Partey and potentially even bring competition to Xhaka's position, and then a wide forward who can play in a number of areas in the front line, probably mainly in the wide areas, but could also cover centrally. I think people are quickly forgetting how versatile Martinelli can be as well. So he doesn't necessarily have to be really versatile, because I think Martinelli can be that as well. But I think we do need to add someone in that forward line. So yeah, successful window is the 2 in midfield and the forward line. I think a really successful window is potentially bringing in another defender as well, or another midfielder to kind of replace Sambi and El Neni for the long term. So I don't really think that, the more I look at it and the more I've watched him, I don't think Lokonga does have the future that maybe we thought he might have at the start. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we will. I think you're right in terms of positions. We certainly need to look at the midfield and wide forward or front forward areas, in my opinion. But I don't look at the Arsenal setup currently and think, wow, it needs 7 or 8 players anymore. And it wasn't long ago that we were saying that. So it does prove how far we have come. And I just hope that we get off to the great start and that we don't get any injuries in the World Cup, Tom, because that will, of course, be a big downer. I do think England and Brazil and France have an opportunity to go quite to the distance. So we've got quite a lot of competition in there with some of our players, Saliba, Saka, Ramsdale, obviously Jesus and Martinelli. But it looks like some of the others could be coming home soon, which of course is going to be a good thing. Hopefully they come through fit and they're not injured and they can go and enjoy Dubai and then get fit and ready for Boxing Day, because I'm looking forward to it. Tom, always a pleasure having you on, mate. How can people follow you and what you got coming up, bruv?
Yeah, you can find me at the Gooner Talk, always written work over at Football London, as per 8 a.m. every day, other than this weekend, actually, because I'm taking a weekend off. But tomorrow morning there'll be a show, because I'm pre-recording one with Harry shortly that will be going out, and then there'll be none on Sunday, but then back to work as usual on Monday. But yeah, pleasure as always, my friends. Come on.
May, you're always welcome, man, and it's a pleasure having you on. Make sure you go over and follow Tom and all of his content and get over to Football London and read all of his articles. Guys, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and come and follow me on socials at DanArsenal87. We'll see you next time, and as always, up the Arsenal. Take care, guys.